Yes, request Rupali to introduce Professor Sujoy Chakravarty, please.
Thank you, Sarojita. Hello, everyone. My name is Rupali Sharma. I've been a student at CSP, and I've had the fortune of introducing Professor Chakravarty for this session, although I don't think he needs any introduction. He is, we know that he studied from Presidency College and he has his PhD from Purdue University and has been associated with many institutions thereafter as a professor. Currently, he's a professor at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning, and his research areas are in applied microeconomics, experimental and behavioral economics, and he's pretty much the authority in this area, in this field, in the country. So without wasting anyone else's time further, I would like to hand over the online mic to you.
Thank you, Rupali. I hope you're doing well.
Yes.
A while that we've met. So, but thank you for all of you for signing up for this. I promise to make it interesting, and I don't know if I'll succeed, but let me just quickly start because there's a lot to tell, and so this talk is entitled Homo Behavioralists, or the Future Models of the Economic Agent. Now, why I say future is also a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is developing as we speak, and a different way of looking at economics. I'm not throwing away stuff necessarily, unless there's lots in economics you can throw away actually, but I don't think the whole approach that people like me and many others all over the world take is to throw things away. We try to enrich them with understandings, with new types of frameworks that we incorporate into this. So quickly, let me get into it. Wait, I'm just going to start. Okay, it's not moving very well. I'm gonna. What? How do I move this bar? Okay. Okay. All right. So to just something people may have already known, those are economics, that we have the standard way of modeling economics is the hypercognitive, materially rational economic agent. And he perceives rewards and forms beliefs that are accurate on average, affected by own material rewards, decisions not affected by seemingly relevant contexts. Agents behave similarly when making the same decision at a different time point, that is, attitudes and preferences are time invariant. I mean, if this reminds you a little bit of Ayn Rand's books and the protagonist there, it's probably correct. And this kind of extreme individualism forms a bedrock for what we understand to be neoclassical economics and strains of classical economics, including models of what we call spontaneous order and Hayek and other kinds of so-called right-wing type ideologies, which say things like don't do anything to the economy, things will just clean up. So that is patently incorrect, of course, but that's the other extreme. So the micro extreme of these macro spontaneous order models is this guy or whatever, this agent, who does this. And it's not moving for some. So economic theory, of course, is concerned with mostly rational benchmarks. And we don't, as long as a theory explains something somewhat and is elegant, is tractable, lends itself to axiomatization, all of that, and that's good. And then we're happy with it. At least we were happy with it. Economists would speak to 4 other people and, other theorists like themselves, and they're like, hey, what do you think? And they're like, okay. And then it becomes a paper, so that's how we went for many, many decades. But however, there's a lot of variation in behavior. You just have to read all these other books out on the market, people like, all the various super freakonomics and the undercover economists and the subversive economist and the radical economist, and who all present a kind of contemporary world where people are not behaving like the textbook. I mean, there's people are making all kinds of different, showing all kinds of different levels of contribution. There all kinds of desire to be corrupt or not corrupt, levels of cooperation, wherewithal to take risks. All of these things have a widespread in observed behavior. And a very small segment of that is explained with that fictional model that I just, the sketch model of the economic agent. So obviously there's a lot of unhappiness through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And today in 2024, we have come to kind of accepted definition of what behavioral economics ceases to be, wants to do, desires to do. Uses variants of traditional economic assumption, often with a psychology is the largest segment from which we draw under, to explain and predict behavior, provide policy prescriptions. So we move away from the black box framework of economic theories, which is, hey, we have just a production function, utility function, and if you ask why that function, and they'll be like, hey, it works, right? So that's good enough. So we move beyond that to explore sociological, psychological, anthropological processes and channels that may trigger all kinds of responses. And agents, of course, also respond to non-monetary incentives. That is something that we find of great interest, actually, which in the field of economics thought was completely bogus. But now I think people have woken up and stuff. So it's not, people understand that a lot of stuff motivates us besides monetary or even material incentives. Okay, so it is not itself a rejection of all principles of neoclassical economics, nor is it a strict endorsement of what is popularly today goes by the combine of heterodox economics, but it does reject many orthodox predictions, and it does embrace some very heterodox predictions, even though the methodological canvas with which it's being done with may not particularly be understandable to heterodox macroeconomists. And I want to talk a little bit about that as we move along. Okay, so what's the relation? Is heterodox economics, is behavioral economics heterodox? Is it counter-heterodox? Is it a CIA plot? Whatever, we need to figure that out. Okay, so we're trying to obviously build new life in old theories, which, I mean, if you hear the great CESP alum talking, about after his Nobel Prize, and when he was asked, like, what do you think economists are doing? And then Professor Banerjee, of course, said, we are little better at doing prediction than an astrologer. So, I mean, that's pretty harsh, pronouncement of economics. And but I tend to agree, actually. And I point you to this paper by Asimoglu, Leibson, and List, the same Darren Asimoglu, who won the Nobel. He doesn't just do that colonial stuff. He's also interested in history dependence and a whole lot of other interesting things, whatever you may think of his work. And we can talk a little bit about that also, the new Nobel, because I think it's kind of linked to this stuff. But let me go through this first. Okay, so both traditional and behavioral economists believe that people try to choose the best feasible option. Like we think there is some optimization. Now, is it done like the agent in the Ayn Rand book? Probably not. But people are trying to do, if you see from your own life, you're trying to optimize something. It's unclear what that is fully. Reading your economics textbook will not help you in there. People try to choose their best feasible option when interacting with others. So there is some kind of equilibrium. Now, whether that equilibrium is as harshly axiomatized as some of the stuff you read in theory textbooks, probably not. But there is a concept of equilibrium. Even what Hoff and Stiglitz and people call an equilibrium in fiction, where we all believe the same fiction and we have an equilibrium. Okay, it's not disequilibrium. It's equilibrium as long as there is no unilateral incentive to change your behavior. given that other people are not changing their behavior. Everybody feels like this, you're in some form of equilibrium. And of course, models need to be tested with data. And this is, which is also called empiricism, which in economics is fairly standard. And most economists of various flavors would say that we need some empiricism. A lot of other social sciences, however, very uncomfortable with empiricism. So you'll find that things are being explained in 2024 with models from 1859. I mean, this is not going to work. So, I mean, just my opinionated stance on this is, so you need some empiricism. I think what they mean is deep positivism. The problem I feel with economics and all shades of economics is opinion is very high. So what happens is you throw the baby out with the bathwater all the time. I think what some of my esteemed colleagues mean is that that you can't have this kind of toxic positivity, like everything is okay. But no, empiricism means we believe in the human race as it was in the 19th century, which is clearly patently untrue. Okay, let's move on. Salient points in the history of behavioral economics. The first paper, I mean, it's difficult to chart, and I don't like this kind of like, what's the first album and things like that. The first one is, I guess, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's prospect theory piece. I'll discuss it in little detail in a bit. So that's 79. But I think work has been going on by a fair number of cognitive psychologists and social psychologists from earlier, who were looking at economics type issues. Modern behavioral economics is younger than the rest of the field. I mean, it has a role. There is a kind of classical counterpoint to behavioral economics, which would be the work of Hume and Smith, and who, while, in a tepid way, being okay with market transactions, they also said, be careful, mind it like that, like, don't be like unkind. So they were not, but as harsh as later scholars have of market mechanisms and all that. But to their credit, to Adam Smith's credit at least, he did talk about the issues of cooperation and redistribution, particularly if you read the theory of moral sentiments. Bear in mind, this was written in 1759, so it's a long time ago. Okay. Anytime you want to interrupt me and say something, please do so. If you don't understand something or you don't agree with me, you can criticize me or whatever you want to do. But do speak up, because it's a little difficult to speak to a screen. As I found out during the COVID pandemic, I'm very used to interactive stuff. I'm used to saying provocative things and my students like asking me things. So you can ask me whatever you want to, and I'll try to answer it the best I can. Otherwise, we'll have a discussion after the talk. And so there's some classical recognition of what we call social preferences, which, I will tell you later, is a big part of what we think about in economics. We take it from individual utility functions into agents who also build other people's utility in their own utility function. So we have what are called not individual preferences, but social preferences. So it's an important canon of what behavioral economics stands on, actually. And if you want a kind of behavioral theory of everything, why do these divergences happen? So one, the psychologists and behavioral economists say that the three main things besides financial incentives that affect why we buy something, why we do what we do, why we choose the careers we do, etc., are social preferences, cognitive biases, and self-control issues. By the way, social preferences includes how we react with institutions, how we internalize norms, how we look at group norms. So in there comes social identity theory, and a whole lot of other goodies from psychology start entering in. Cognitive biases is a very large literature. In economics, when economics started taking cognizance of it, was the work of Herbert Simon, who was a computer scientist at Carnegie Mellon. And he talked about cognitive biases and self-control issues, which are that we have a lot of inbuilt ways in which we compute the stimuli coming in. And that often does not lead to these clean, optimized outcomes in our behavior. And these are hardwired. So in other words, to quote Dan Ariely, we are predictably irrational, irrational in quotes. I mean, what would be thought of by orthodox economics to be irrational. And according to social and cognitive psychologists, there is what is called dual process theories. There are many dual process theories. I don't want to get into these fields in which I'm a novice, but just quickly to tell you that in our brain, we have something called system one, which comprises the primitive part of our brains, which is the hippocampus and the amygdala, and is quick and always on. This is called the automatic system. The second system, called system two, very unimaginatively named, is the slower, more time-consuming set of processes leading to more deliberate and nuanced reasoning, which is called the reflective system. Behavioral biases occur when we use system one to make decisions where we should be using system two. So not all biases are necessarily harmful for human welfare. We are what we call ecologically rational. We are not absolutely rational, as a lot of the spontaneous order guys and the general economic right wing would believe. And we are lots of biases are built to create welfare. So this is not true that we should just avoid all biases and they're all like makes us inferior. So this is not at all what behavioral economists, particularly people like Gerd Gigerenzer and people who are also not into orthodox, who also dislike orthodox economics, will tell you. Okay, so I wanted to do it in bullet point. I wanted to bring up a few principles, if you call it, and please take this with a pinch of salt. I mean, some of these principles I made up, and some of them are from Asimoglu, Leibson, and List, who have a very thought-provoking paper where they attempt in 2015 or 16 to come up with some, in quotes, principles. And I added a few to them. They missed a few, I believe. And so the first principle I call principle zero is the new thing here is experiments. So, and I dwell on this deeply in my class in the master's program, which is that data that is collected in surveys, which are very large, which have good, they have really good representatives. I mean, they represent the population, unfortunately, is collected in one state. And there is an issue of what we call the missing counterfactual. Okay, so in naturally occurring data, or what we call natural experiments, often the problem is of a missing counterfactual. That is, person I is not observed in more than one state simultaneously. Thus, any treatment effect, we can use that data to also tease out different effects using regression or ANOVA. But a treatment effect is not definable, as it measures the effect of altering certain environmental or institutional factors with all other things remaining constant. So, yeah. Okay, that was not a question.
No, sorry about it.
That's fine. Okay, yeah. Let's move on. So these counterfactual observations are sometimes referred to as a control group. Theoretically, the control and the treatment group must differ only with respect to group membership of the agent, in what group. The control is often very, very difficult to obtain, and some experiments it's impossible to naturally find an excluded group for a particular focus variable of interest. Human beings are, of course, also quite heterogeneous with respect to traits, attributes, emotions, cognitions, which dynamically change, etc. We have what is called neuroplasticity, which means you love something one day and 3 months later you hate it. I mean, think about your own lives. You loved something before, you dislike it now. It's because our neuronal structure is constantly changing, and new neural pathways are being created, and some other neural pathways are being written over, etc. So you can think of the human brain as a constantly flowing river, which is what actually these amazing new studies on functional magnetic resonance imaging, they show up when they show brain activity. And that's pretty fascinating, actually. And And it causes us to differ quite considerably, over our lifetimes. And of course, there may be unobservable, unmeasurable nuisance variables that affect different groups of individuals differently. So that's one reason why we need to do controlled experiments. Now, if you get a large enough survey, you can sometimes do experimental like things with it. But unless you can control a certain variable and make it a part of your design, it is very difficult to understand what is called causality. So correlations, unfortunately, do not make for causality. Like just because two variables are varying together and you find one being higher when the other one is higher, does not mean one caused the other. And a whole lot of problems in social science, including problems with policy, have to do with actually understanding causalities. And if you want to know, that's one reason with all its problems, things like RCTs and randomized evaluations have become important. Whatever you think of them, I mean, I don't think highly of a lot of them. And I feel that the methodology has a ways to go before it matures. But I still think it's really important and useful to be able to do this. Okay, so some good examples are the work of Duflo and Banerjee. They from the early 2000s, which is and if you want to look at their paper on gender and leadership, or Banerjee, Cole, Duflo, and Linden doing work on education and how to boost children's scores, things like that, where they run these randomized control trials and they look at the treatment effect of a certain, of using a certain variable. A quick example of that would be after school programs for underprivileged children. Does it actually have an impact on their reading and writing scores? So these are the kinds of things that you'd look at in such what are called behavioral or functional interventions. Okay, principle one, human agents are boundedly rational, and using a very impossible model of as a counterfactual is you're going to always come up short. So in other words, people try to make the optimal choice. They are optimizers, but they sometimes make mistakes. It's important to emphasize that these mistakes are partially predictable. And why do they make mistakes? Because at the end of the day, a lot of the times we are making decisions with system one, where it is very difficult to make decisions with the reflective system. So oftentimes what we understand as behavioral biases are things we do when we do shortcuts. And these shortcuts are important because they make you lead your life. So it's not like I'm not saying a human agent is stupid because he takes a heuristic shortcut. What I'm trying to say is we all do it. And it's about time that economics also embraced this as a fundamental principle and didn't consider any deviation from optimal paths as some example of stupidity, failure. All of this does not sit well with the idea of the agent that we are trying to create. Okay. Reference dependence, very, very important. And this is something that neoclassical theory misses almost completely. Unless you think of the work of, I think there is SCIU, which is the contextual or subjective expected utility model, which is not very well developed, which was developed sometimes in the 50s and 60s. People do not care so much for absolute rewards. So, for example, what you view as a gain or loss depends on not just on the number. It also depends on what a certain reference group, what you feel your position should be. So, for example, if tomorrow I look at my paycheck and it has a certain amount of money, which is a certain amount, and then I go somewhere else and I get a little less money, it's a gain, but I will feel like it's a loss. So when people actually have their income gets lowered to another positive amount, they don't behave like expected utility theorists. They actually get very upset at that, and they view that second outcome not as a smaller gain, but as a loss. Somewhere expected utility theory missed this out, and von Neumann and Morgenstern missed this out, that we are actually, our idea of what is a gain or a loss crucially depends on a reference point. So if you're a businessman and you're making a certain amount of reward and you're getting a certain amount of utility from it, tomorrow, if you get used to that habit, if there's a habit persistence on that, tomorrow when your profit lowers, you will not behave like you got, oh, I made profit, it's smaller. You'll be like, oh my God, I made a loss. And that is something that people in, I think, the post-war kind of, micro-macro divide really killed these kinds of interesting ideas, because there was a macroeconomist actually in the 40s and 50s called James Duesenberry, who is not known as a behavioral economist, but he said exactly this, that your consumption ratchets and there's habit persistence. These are not things that classical economics thinks is important. But a lot of classical economists of that time, people who are mainstream, actually thought of these. And I'll talk a little bit about Keynes, who was a contemporary. I'll talk about him too. And I think somewhere down the line, micro and macro kind of deviated. And macroeconomists didn't really care about a good micro foundation, except the really incomprehensible neoclassical macro theories of late. I mean, those have extremely convoluted micro foundations, and some finance, investments and all of that has micro foundations. But generally, micro foundations has been weak because there has been a divide. People who do macro don't do micro. People who do micro don't do macro. And so a lot of stuff got missed, actually, I feel. I'll talk more about this as we move along. Okay, moving on. Take a look at these two figures, okay? I remember I'm talking about context or reference dependence. Which one looks larger? Anybody? The
Same
right-hand
size.
side.
Right, the one on the right.
But if you actually go on your screen and take a measurement, you'll see they're the same. Will you go ahead and try that? Particularly the one on the right with the house. That's amazing, actually. Just try it.
Oh, the
The
Are you saying
black
the-
lines. The black lines.
yeah, black lines are same size, that I can understand. But what about the
they-
house?
No, the house is not. I'm talking about the two black
Yeah.
lines. So where you situate them makes a big difference. Even when I
Right.
tell you that they are the same, you don't see them as the same.
Yes.
So this is the famous Müller-Lyer illusions. These were made very popular by Gestalt psychologists and behavioralists later on, behaviorism. And and these were made by looking at context and seeing how it fools us. So what seems nice in one context and really great, if you remove the context, it seems really bad. And this can be applied to many, many things. For example, when you have no money or very low money and people around you have no money, you feel okay, like our lives in JNU when we came in the 90s. But now suppose you have no money, but people around you are like, have tons of money. You're going to feel much, much worse because context matters heavily. Somewhere in our study of a whole lot of modern phenomenon, we have forgotten to take care of context. We have not talked about context. And that's why I feel work like, even though I'm a little underwhelmed by AJR or Asimoglu's work, this particular work, and I feel a lot of other people like Sam Bowles and many other people have been talking about the institutions and institutional dependence. But I feel this is important work because contexts are very, very important. And the same levels of efficiency potential efficiency when put in different contexts will lead to very, very different path-dependent outcomes. I think this somewhere mainstream economics theory was not very comfortable with this understanding. And I think the whole politics of trying to create these strange models where we say, oh yeah, it's all spontaneous order and we don't have to mess in markets is also fundamental intellectual laziness in not being able to model these things very well, you know. And similar here, another Muller-Lear illusion. Let's move on. You can read the thing later. Okay. So an important sort of a topic that has come in from psychology into economics is anchoring. Anchoring just means whatever if a certain behavior, value, set of values is anchored inside you, when you make decisions, you are going to neglect optimality and you're going to try to conform with this anchor. And human beings are really bad at this. Like, we get anchored all the time. I mean, the most ridiculous experiment of this Ariely, Lowenstein, and Prelec is that they were trying to find the willingness to pay for common stationery and computer peripherals. And so they did this experiment in which people were asked to state what their willingness to pay is for these common goods for which the values were known, but it's known, they would have had an idea of how much it cost in the market. And one treatment group was asked to write down the last 2 digits of their social security number, which go from 00 to 99. And guess what? Predictably, humans who had 99 wrote higher values. So what we write down as values is deeply dependent cognitively in what values are in our head at the point of decision making. This is extremely disturbing, actually, which tells you things like, why social media works to make people so angry, for example, is that you prime somebody. Priming is a way of using the environment or certain protocols in order to convince you of something's value or something's salience. And these kinds of priming is very important, because if you're seeing a certain information that's being thrown at you, you will get influenced by it. And these are frightening things, actually, which are coming into the world. And a lot of this research actually needs to explore these kinds of frameworks, because we are creating all these strange echo chambers. And so in a sense, anchoring creates informational herding, if you want to, you link it to the herding literature. And a whole lot of the times you can manipulate people's ideas. And in fact, businesses and salespeople have been using anchoring a whole lot of times to manipulate human beings to buy their product. And a good one would be bait and switch. And, there are whole lots of strategies we can talk about later, but let me move on. Okay, so here is one. The salesperson has 3 items for sale: expensive, medium, high, and cheap. Show the customer the expensive item first, which acts as an anchor, makes it easier to sell the medium high price item. So there's all these Hollywoody tropes, daddy is going to buy his daughter a gift on Christmas Eve. And there's this one doll, which, and it's like, daddy, get me that doll, and then the daddy is running. And then, of course, the department store knows exactly this. It's done its survey. So what it does is it has a certain doll, and it obviously doesn't produce that much of them or hides them away. And when he's like, can I have that particular doll? And then, sorry, sir, we're out. And then, the guy is like, oh my God. And then it's like, hey, but you can always take this other doll, which is actually priced fairly high. This is called bait and switch. So these things are all because of anchoring. When you get too anchored to certain salience, I have to buy that good. Or and then you don't care about anything else. So these are also examples of where you can take anchoring. Once you're anchored to paying a certain amount of money, you're willing to pay out a close sum to get something you don't really like, And these are quite deadly, and they've been used for decades and decades. But it's only economists who didn't know about them. Okay. So
Sujoy,
Go on.
Sorry, I think there's a question by Kanika. Kanika,
Yeah.
do you want to?
Yeah, ask please. Anika.
Hello, sir. No, that was not a question. I just wanted to clarify that is decoy effect also an anchoring mechanism?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a good one. I wish I could go through all the examples, but I'm being a little sloppy here. So excuse me. If I was speaking about any one of these topics, I would do it in a much less sloppy way. But I'm trying to get you guys an idea without and move and cover a fair amount of material. You know,
Yes, I understand.
mired in one thing. Please read the PowerPoint later if you're interested.
Sure.
I'm going to move on to framing. Okay. So I'm going to move on to a whole lot of other things. An important thing that comes out, and I want to highlight this, this is one of the most important principles in behavioral economics, is what Kahneman and Tversky 79 found, and this may be the cornerstone modern result in economics. If you want to know what's the 3 top results in economics in the last 45, 50 years, this would be one of them. What they found was that human beings, when they are looking at uncertain environments, they are much more sensitive to loss. So, for example, if you tell me that, hey, if you play a lottery, say, of 0 and 1,000 rupees positive with half and half probability, or do you want 500 rupees for sure? Maybe I have an example here. Oh, no, I don't. And most people would be risk averse, and they would say, I want 500 rupees for sure. I don't want to play the lottery between 0 and 1,000. But now suppose I flip that lottery and give you a lottery between 0 and losing 1 grand versus losing 500 rupees for sure. I'm willing to bet more of you would play the lottery now. Am I right or am I wrong? Think about this. Do the thought experiment. And if you don't do it later. But what they found very shockingly was that we are risk-seeking over uncertain losses and risk-averse over uncertain gains. This, of course, turns a whole lot of things on their head. You know, it creates a lot of trouble. And it leads to situations in which the independence axiom of expected utility theory stands nullified. So this is an important result. It has a huge wrecker ball potential on a whole lot of mainstream economics models. So something as simple as this. And this was the sort of big result in their Kahneman-Tversky 79 paper. So just to move on and so, for example, they did another interesting experiment where they had these simple objects like mugs and pens. They allowed one group to own them, like they were told, these are yours, we're giving them to you. And another group, they were given a certain amount of money to spend. And they were told, okay, so one group was asked for the willingness to accept a price for their items they own. And the other group was told how much would their willingness to pay be for these items. Now, to their horror, what they found was that the willingness to accept differed statistically significantly from the willingness to pay. And what was the result? When you identify something as your own, you are much more reluctant to part with it. This is called the endowment effect. It's very popular. It was a part of Taylor's Nobel. He talked about this a whole lot. And so they were allowed to, so what they found actually was that willingness to accept is higher than willingness to pay. So if you own something or if there's psychological ownership, you will be much less willing to part with that and you want a higher price. But this really makes market interactions very strange because we have the idea of one price, right? One endogenous measure of value. That's completely destroyed. And this experiment has replicated time and time again, which is what has led to things like people auctioning their trash objects on eBay and stuff like that. Because if you own something, you like it a lot, you know? Like I have some old faded shirts and I love them. If somebody wanted to buy it from me, even though it's worth nothing, I'd be like, no way, pay me like 10,000 rupees, But when I go to see the similar shirt in the market, I'm bargaining for it and things like that. So human beings have these are effects that are coming out, psychological effects, which need to be somewhere integrated with these very perfect models of utility and consumer behavior, etc. Okay, so this is the famous experiment. Okay, number 3, people have low executive control. And what does that mean actually? It means that in traditional economic models, there is no gap between a person's good intentions and their actions. So the intent-action gap is small. So by contrast, in the model of present bias, which is what a lot of people have studied in behavioral economics, people plan to work hard, diet, exercise, quit smoking, save for retirement, blah, blah, blah. And then they renege at the last second. This is called present bias. So it's like when I'm looking at a longer horizon, I'm going to be like, I'm going to go and exercise, and then when it comes the time for you to go, you're like snoozing your alarm clock. So in the longer term, people behave differently. So when you give people, so if you want a numerical example of this, given that mostly you are economics students, it would be like, suppose I told you, hey, listen, would you like, what would you prefer? Like 100 rupees now or 200 rupees 6 months later? Okay, let's make it 1,000 rupees now or 2,000 rupees 6 months later. Most of you would take the 1,000 rupees now. But if I tell you, hey, listen, do you want 1,000 rupees 1 year, exactly 1 year from now? Or do you want 2,000 rupees 2 years from now? So all I did was I took the domain of the decision and I translated it outwards, okay? And strangely, you find that in the longer horizon, people will want do what's optimal, want the 2,000 rupees. And they'll be like, hey, if I have to wait 1 year, I'll wait another year in 2,000. But if it's now versus 1 year, most of us would take the smaller amount now. If you don't agree, you can always interrupt me, because these are all being tested and these are all experiments which are okay. So for example, interesting studies that show that snacks chosen in advance are overwhelmingly healthy, but snacks chosen for immediate consumption are not. Okay. I mean, there's issues about cognitive load and a whole lot of stuff that psychologists have done with this consumer behavior stuff. So that is really thought-provoking. And after reading that, actually, when you read this vanilla consumer behavior in economics, you feel almost annoyed. You guys, we didn't really think. We just made some really wooden-looking theory with some axioms. So it was like the axioms were more important than actually, being able to understand people's behavior. Okay. The fourth thing, what I call principle 4, is other regarding preferences. We are not all, whatever that guy's name was in the Howard Roark, that's named the guy, Howard Roark, in Ayn Rand. I bet the Gen Z people have no clue who Ayn Rand is, but that's cool. Like, you didn't miss much. Okay, so although we mostly care about our own material payoffs, we also care about the actions, intentions, and payoffs of others, even people outside our family. So even non-kin, we care about non-kin. These social preferences include altruism, warm glow, reciprocity, spite. Social preferences need not be always good, they may be bad. Spite is when I would lower my own payoff to lower your payoff. That's spite. Like, I hate the person so much, I'm going to sabotage them, at my own cost. So that's spite. That's a social preference too. Okay. So, of course, that, this has a very profound impact on game theoretic predictions. I don't want to dwell on it. I can go on for like 2 hours on game theoretic predictions with the light of this idea that we are not maximizers. So, a very popular way to test this and experiment is the ultimatum game. In the ultimatum game, it's like, say, Shurajit and I are partnered, okay? So I'm the proposer and he's the recipient. So in the ultimatum game, I say, okay, so I'm going to share 1,000 rupees with Shurajit, and I get to make that offer. So what's the game institution? I make the offer to Shurajit. I give him X amount of offer. Shurajit then agrees whether he likes it or not. If he thinks I was a jerk to him, he can veto me. In which case we both get 0. And so think of it as a Rubinstein-style bargaining game of 1 round. And at the end of that round, the pie, like the ice cream melts, the pie goes, So in such a situation, what would game theory tell you? Anybody, what would happen? What do you think I would do? How much should I offer Shurajit?
Yeah, can I attempt? Game theory tells us that it is just a little more than 0. I mean, or one and 999, something like that. The lowest amount possible, because in all others, if you offer 0, he gets 0. If you offer anything more than 0, he is better off.
Yeah.
And so are you.
That's correct. So that's the good Schmidberger and Schwartz, when they did in 82, they found, of course, this is nonsense. People don't do that. The people actually give close to half the pie, and the other person mostly doesn't veto. So the outcome is extremely far removed from the game theoretic prediction. I give an epsilon, and the person says, hey, epsilon is better than 0, so I should take the epsilon. No, no. Absolutely not. Like people veto such offers. So this, a lot of these game theory results, which we were in my graduate school years, because I went to study at a very game theory and econometrics heavy school, Purdue. And they were like, oh my God, that's so obvious. And I'm like, it's not obvious at all. Okay, guys, it's totally non-obvious. Okay, so this is not true. Human agents just don't behave like that. Okay, so there are really nice theories, and very Fair and Schmidt started this mini industry. Then Gary Bolton, who was in UT Dallas, where I was. Then there was, I don't know, Charnes, who just passed away, sadly, Gary Charnes this year, and Matt Rabin, who's a game theorist at Berkeley. All these guys have amazing. So we've done a lot of work, actually. So if game theorists don't know these models, they should educate themselves. I think there's a whole, particularly in the area of game theory, this idea of we are selfish maximizers is so old that it's uncool now. Like, guys, drop it. Like, we are not self-regarding only. We are heavily other-regarding. Okay, so I want to set the record straight. Like, that result, the selfish result, never replicates. People never behave like this. It needs to be taken out of textbooks. It needs to be, that's one thing that needs to be thrown in the garbage. And we need a new theory. We need to put in these other regarding preference theories into our textbooks. So our kids, when they're 17 years old, actually looks at humanity for what it is, not like some strange, disembodied alien creature who just, thinks about themselves and doesn't care about anything else. So I think this is one example where I'm not being so charitable. And I think this self-regarding utility function needs to be given a kick on the backside. That's what you can disagree with. Okay, let's keep moving. Shit, it is not moving. Okay, so dictator ultimatum games. Okay, so you can take a look at these, which tells you that people are not self-regarding. They have both altruism and reciprocity. Reciprocity means you do good for me, I do good for you. Right? Okay. The next one, which is very important, which has led to many fights and many sorts of professional issues in many institutions, market fundamentalism. Sometimes market exchange makes psychological factors cease to matter, but many psychological and cultural factors matter even in markets. And it is not all this spontaneous order fiction, like, oh, at the lower level, people are stupid, but the market just aggregates them out, this is patently wrong. And of course, there's some amazing scholars in behavioral finance and people who have really laid this bare, Raghuram Rajan, I guess, Robert Schiller, even Taylor, Richard Taylor. They've done some amazing work to show that that there are biases are built into the way people invest. And this goes all the way to Keynes, actually. So I just wanted to move to, so the question is, was Keynes the first heterodox behavioral economist? And this may be of interest to a lot of you who think behavioral economics is so far removed from heterodox. You know, it's just some agent, CIA determined agent of neoclassical economics. You couldn't be further from the truth, guys. Okay, so in the general theory, Keynes explicitly emphasized the importance of psychological propensities in analyzing the economic consequences of human behavior and used them to support his departure from neoclassical tradition. Things like wage rigidity, what we call emotions. I think what he was talking about is emotion and affect. He called it colorfully, he called it animal spirits, money illusion. I mean, I have papers which look at emotion and things like that. I mean, it's becoming so mainstream these days. Money illusion, conventions, norms, uncertainty, all of them all suggest that Keynes refused the imposition of rationality. And this Peck and Millen is a great article, Journal of Socioeconomics. It actually correlates general theory of Keynes with principles in behavioral economics. I'm happy to share the article. Please do read it because it's actually remarkably nice, this article. And Keynes had the absence, and this is my feeling, of good micro foundations, which led to a kind of neoclassical takeover of Keynes. And I believe Keynes is one of the most interesting figures in economics. And most of us who do behavior deeply admire Keynes and his ideas, and as told in the general theory. And, you know, and there was something called neoclassical synthesis. I don't know if you guys know this, where mainstream economists, market economists, kind of made it like so that, okay, all these short-term things lead to all kinds of barriers in markets and all kinds of incompleteness, as Keynes had said. But in the larger long run, you know, spontaneous order, it all washes away. So it's the same argument, it's the same, you know, tried, tested, incorrect argument of market fundamentalists. Oh, yeah, you know, people are stupid in the short run, but in the long run. So you get this presentation of Keynes with a very neoclassical micro foundation, which is doing him a huge disservice, I believe. And I think if Keynes were alive today, he'd have been beating these guys up, because he didn't say, if you look at Keynesian macroeconomics that we study even at lower levels of the higher education, so ISLM model and things like that, the fundamental micro foundation of it is some maximizing agent. But Keynes didn't say that at all. He didn't say everybody deterministically maximizes all the time. So Akerlof, I feel one of the sharpest minds of the 20th century, and I go beyond economics, and his work is outstanding and informs many branches of economics. I mean, you should, if you're interested in going much beyond the economics textbook, you should read Akerlof. He's in the economics textbook too. And Akerlof and Schiller have a really amazing book called Animal Spirits. I don't know if you guys have read it. Please read it, because it's a great look at behavioral finance, actually. So those of you interested in finance, institutions, exploitation, how all kinds of scams and things happen, I think these Akerlof and Schiller and all that reinforce very fundamental ideas about human behavior, which lead to these outcomes. So it's kind of behaviorally informed Keynesianism. They present that in this book. So you guys should get a copy of this. If Keynes is the first heterodox behavioral economist, radical theorists like Sam Bowles and Herb Gintis, who I admire deeply, would provide micro foundations for capitalist exploitation in their classic book, which I think is outstanding, Schooling in Capitalist America. If you haven't read this book, for those of you who are, you know, more technically minded, like I know people like Rupali and people who do really good like mathematical econ, I think you should take a look at this stuff. I think it's a very different way of looking at micro. And some of it is encapsulated in Sam Bowles's really amazing textbook, which I try to use in my class, which is Institutions, Evolution, and Behavior, Microeconomics. And I think it's a must read for a lot of people who do micro theory, like do theory, not people like me who kind of consume theory and do other stuff. Okay, so that's one book to look at, Schooling in Capitalist America. Their theories of history dependence, evolution, and context are largely ignored by a lot of heterodox economists also, who find their work very individual centric. I feel a lot of heterodox economists have not moved beyond this critique of individual centric. Anything you measure individually is somehow wrong. But you need micro foundations. You cannot do theories at a larger level without micro foundations. Now, I'm not saying the existing micro foundations are good. There, some of them are not good, but I think somewhere you need this. And that's why I find a lot of anger, I mean, not anger, but a lot of non-acceptance of Bowles and Gintis's amazing body of work by heterodox econ, though they are in a very heterodox, they were in a very heterodox school, UMass Amherst. And there's also this micro-macro split, which I find very strange, and it has led to all kinds of distortions in the field, where macroeconomists of certain types don't want to associate with microeconomists because they think we are like the agents of the devil or something. Like, you guys are always talking about some kind of individualism and individual determinism. No, guys, like, come on, nobody's talking about that. We have people like Raj Chetty and people, and also Matt Jackson and all these guys doing all this amazing work on networks, which is not individual centric at all. We have all this work on peer effects, which show how group membership, affects outcomes. So everything is not done from the perspective of the individual. Like, if that's what some of you are thinking, this is not true. It's become, in fact, so mainstream that we have a new paper by these Lowenstein and people who talk about decision-making in the S frame and the I frame. And we now, a lot of us who started with micro feel that, the I frame is very dumb for studying certain types of decision-making. Like, for example, if you go and ask people all kinds of questions about so for example, if you ask women about all kinds of issues related to empowerment, and a lot of women, particularly in underprivileged communities, are not making decisions, and in fact underprivileged people in general are not making individual choice decisions. Individual choice is an overrated concept. I mean, you've got people like Robert Sapolsky and people who will tell you that what we think is individual will and all that is a big fiction. It's all some form of group dynamics. So I think we're moving towards that. And I see in the future a very healthy thing of the correct synthesis of these ideas with, and the various schools of economics being synthesized, actually. And not just synthesized, but I also see a lot of work coming in from biology, from anthropology, which kind of, melds together. So the future is quite bright, I think, for people who want to embrace these things. Of course, for hidebound people who want to say the same thing for years and years, I think things are moving on pretty fast for them. But if you want to update, there's a lot of ways of updating, which are nice. They're not at all, they're realistic, they're nice, they're multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary. So it's time to kind of move on, I believe. Okay, sixth principle, which has attracted a lot of attention, which is nudging. So this stuff is quite popular now. And so remember, a nudge or a boost is something which is called a libertarianly paternalistic intervention, which is libertarian because nudge theorists don't want to prescribe or ban, but by the power of suggestion will try to inform people what is, what's better for them. Now, obviously, this a problematic concept, I believe. And as somebody who has, I have studies where I do nudging also. So I'm somebody who's seen it from the inside. And I feel that the greatest thing, and I'll leave you with one comment. I can again talk about this for 6 hours, but I'll leave you with one comment is that I feel nudges, which are powers of suggestion, without any explicit material, exchange, well, not conditional on material exchange, is a quick, cheap policy tool. Using them alone may not give you very strong effects. I agree with that. But they're a very good last mile connection for harder incentives. So a lot of the interesting work that nudge units and behavioral intelligence units are doing is being able to combine actual incentives, which is gains and losses, along with suggestion. And that's what the future is of nudging. So nudging in and of itself works only limitedly, in a limited way, I believe. And as somebody I may be very, I have some colleagues who will immediately be like, oh, you traitor, but it's true. It works in a very limited way. And I think that it does need to be combined with other kinds of incentives to really be efficacious. And that's exactly what is being done. I mean, in its truest form, this is called put the healthy stuff in front and put the donuts at the back. And you hope that people will use their system one and come and grab what they, when they're hungry, and then they'll be healthy. So I don't know if you guys think this is a good way to do policy. I'm not so sold on it, but it is an interesting idea. I'll give you that people have limited cognitive load. So if you can put the healthy stuff, in front of them, so and the fried stuff far away, it will lead to maybe healthy behaviors. How many of you agree that this works? Have you tried it on yourselves and other people? Anybody? Okay, who one's tried it?
Yeah,
I think it
sir, but
does.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I haven't tried, but I think it will work. I think it will have some minor effect, but it will have some effect.
It will depend on how you have to change the nudge around. If you give the same nudge, like what I found in my experimental work is that if people understand they're being manipulated, then they get pissed off. So
from the marketing side also, isn't that happening all the time from the marketing side?
Absolutely.
So then for the consumer also, we may attempt the same thing. We know that we are being manipulated from that side, and we're still falling prey to that.
Yeah, so yeah, we're falling prey to that also. And there's also Gigerenzer and Hertwig and those guys at Max Planck have come up with another interesting idea called the boost. The boost is actually using the power of information to convince consumers to make better choices. So it's not just fooling their system one and system two, but it is also systematically trying to affect better outcomes. So those would be called what are called boosts. So informational nudges. Jyotsna Jalan and Somanathan and all have a paper in JD where they go to, I think, people's houses in rural India, and they tell them, look, this is what your water contains. And over time, please filter your water. And they find actually that a lot of health issues occur because people just don't know. They don't have the time. They have busy lives and difficult lives. So sometimes I do believe that the power of suggestion can go a very long way. And that being said, I think these concepts are a little problematic, particularly the way these get marketed. The nudge has got really badly marketed, I believe, which has led it to be viewed very differently by different people. Oh, it's a tool to manipulate. It's a part of the Washington consensus. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think that the marketing has been bad. And of course, nudges have been used all the time by marketers, by snake oil salesmen, so it doesn't, it's got a bad history also. But that doesn't mean it can't do something useful for us. So I'll leave you with that for okay. The seventh thing, which is really stuff that is actually related to this Nobel, and I think that's a lot of people are unhappy with AJR or Asimov, Johnson, and Robinson. because the special sauce is missing in their work, actually. And I think if Massimoglu and all, I mean, this data is very difficult to get. So they got what they got. But I feel that besides institutions, mental models, culture, which comes in through social norms, power norms, also make a difference to the wealth of nations. So I feel AJR with Principle 7 would have made a stronger Nobel. That's my opinion. I mean, these guys are all famous guys. I don't mean to upset them in any way, but it's my humble opinion is that AJR plus culture would have yielded a stronger work. Maybe they agree with that. I think they're pretty smart guys. I think they'll agree. So interestingly, the fundamental ideas of this come from Answigler and Paul DiMaggio, who say that it is useful to think of culture as a set of mental models or schemas that are perpetuated in particular contexts that mediate individuals' perceptions of others and more generally one's experience of the world. So stereotypes are examples of such a cultural model. So Carla Hoff, who visited our center a few months ago, actually, or last year, and end of last year, actually is working on a book, on this with Joe Stiglitz, and these are widely held but fixed and oversimplified images or ideas of persons or groups. Often the attributes of the exemplar may not be among the average attributes of the group or its members. Stereotypes may be constructed or manipulated by members of a society either by design or due to historical accident or both. So this could lead, for example, to large amounts of schematic distribution and fictional equilibria, as Stiglitz and Hoff note in 2010, which is this idea of really wrong notions about others. So what would be some important stereotypes like stupid, like for example, African American people were thought to be lower quality intelligence. This was a completely invented stereotype, actually. And if you read the work of an amazing work of that lady who wrote on caste, the journalist, I forget, Isabel, I forget her name, it'll come back. But this idea that, and the book was called Caste, and this whole idea that stereotypes may actually be manufactured to create stigma for certain communities, and this may lead to productivity on the other side. And I urge you to read the work of Nathan Nunn, amazing economic historian. He's at Harvard. His work on slavery and the US and how efficient this equilibrium was, the slave equilibrium was for the US, for the colonialists at that time. And there's some amazing work by Nathan Nunn, Nunn. Look up his work. Okay, so the construction of racial ideology to justify slavery in North America is an example of such a socially constructed stereotypes. The rigidly established mental model of the biological inequality of white and black people allowed slavery to be adopted, and socially accepted model in the labor market, creating such a, in quotes, equilibrium, sustained on socially constructed fiction. And we are doing that all the time with all these sort of stereotypes which stigmatize people, all of that. And this is going on all the time. Human beings do this a lot. The good news is that stereotypes can be also made better. You can, just like you can manipulate people to have the wrong mental image of an individual, you can manipulate the right one. And a good example that Carla Hoff uses, and I recently also used in is this idea of like how we're observing the idea of Muslims, how Muslims are viewed in Britain changing with the participation of Muslim people in the Premier League, like people like Mesut Ozil or Mohamed Salah and people, and just like the stereotype can be made a bad one, it can also be made an amazing one. And people like Mo Salah and people are seen as great role models for the young in Britain at this point. So the good news with stereotypes is that just like you can make it bad, you can also by policy make it good, And I think somewhere I would see these things with earlier governments. I think private entities have no interest in doing that. But as long as we had a stronger involvement of the government in development, I think founding fathers of this country understood that. So we saw a lot of these, nudges given to us in our childhood to kind of understand that the person may be underprivileged, but he is your brother or sister. These are all more, I think it's got completely gone with network television. And we had to watch all these things like Krishi Darshan and, Bengali programs on DD2 and things like that, which told us how we need to understand how the farmer is and all that. These were actually really good, because I think today's kids grow up without seeing they just have an oversimplified and negative mental model of people, underprivileged people. And I don't want to, again, I'm neck deep in work on stereotypes and culture, so I can again go on for 15 hours about this. But there is an interesting model by Susan Fiske et al., which is that these oversimplified mental models are observed to classify rich individuals as more intelligent and competent than the poor, but of colder disposition. So this also has a class dimension. Because as I'm finding out in my own work with Anuvinda, who is, some of you may know, who is a student here, whose doctoral thesis, where we find that actually stereotypes are maintained by rich people about poor people. And this presence of this stereotype actually, and the anxiety from that stereotype actually lowers performance for more underprivileged or people who perceive themselves to be more underprivileged. So there is a lot of scope in this work. And I think as the world becomes more divided, as we as we go into our little echo chambers and form stereotypes about each other and fight with each other, I think somewhere policy needs to start addressing these mental images and start warning people of the harm they may do. Okay, moving on. I'm going to move on for all that. Please read it later. Okay. So how much time do I have, Surajit?
How much time do you need? I mean, it's okay.
I mean, what's the time now? I mean, I don't want to
5 more minutes, 10 more minutes.
Maybe
5
10 more minutes, and let
Sure,
me
sure.
talk a little bit about and the last point I was going to make, and it's a very long point, is that today we are even aware, and there's another book which I feel is the more of all these interesting books that come in economics, Guns, Germs, and Steel. Then this book by AJR, which is also very being criticized and being liked, and this idea why nations fail. And another book is Joe Hendrick's quite amazing book about psychology of the global north versus psychology of the global south. And he introduced a term in the literature which is really stuck out with behavioral economists, which is weird. Weird is Western educated, industrial, rich, and democratic societies. And these societies, because of certain historical accidents and the falling of certain clans and the dismantling of the monarchy earlier on, their psychology and the way they behave and socially behave and construct institutions is quite different from what happened in the global south. Because as Asimoglu et al. Point out that oftentimes when colonialists came to the global south, they allowed clan structures and exploitation to continue, while in their own countries in the global north, they preached all this democracy. So they have that colonialism as a double standard. But what they did was create very different patterns of behavior. So that's what this book is on. So Hendrick also wrote a book which is called The Weirdest People in the World. I think you guys should read that. All people interested in behavioral economics who sometimes believes that how can you just apply these behavioral models from the global north to behavior in the global south? And people like me who have been running experiments from the early part of the century, we always found our results to be quite different, actually. And that's kind of interesting. So that's the last point, is that there needs to be what is that last point? Oh, it's among the last point. It's the, so I'll stop now because I think it's a lot of stuff to unpack. And I'll just end with this diagram, which I like showing people in my class. So here is the kind of progression from all of this, as I understand it. The middle three boxes, environment to behavior to outcomes, is what traditional economics textbooks tell you. Agent, values, cost, endowment, technology leads to behavior, leads to outcomes. From the 1960s with Douglas North's work, which also got a Nobel before, the second institutions Nobel is with these guys, was that institutions mattered. They affected outcomes, they affected choice behavior, which fed back to institutions. Like a good example is that the institution that, some of us are connected to, JNU, I feel is one that actually influences choice behavior. So when you come and stay in JNU for a few years, you change. And I think when you change, over time, the institution changes too. And there's a circular movement between institutions and how they feed back on behavior. I would like to add, or based on not just my opinion, but other work, is that culture and demographics, particularly social norms and power norms, are also feeding back. And what are these social norms? They may be non-contractual observations. So things like normative behavior, it may not be legally sanctioned behavior. So we use as social norms to understand things which may not be able to be perfectly codified. And but somewhere I feel also there's a lot of blurring between norms and institutions. But their culture and demographics affect behavior. They also make us view our costs and values quite differently. They heavily feed back on institutions, which is demographics and culture. Like as we talk about all the time in India, like, oh my God, that director went and a new director came and the institution totally changed. Guess what happened? He brought in his own culture and his own or her own culture and demographics, power norms and social norms, and they ended up altering the institution. So as you can see, it's quite fragile. If you introduce a certain levels of social norms, you are going to over time see institutions changing, and which will feed back onto social norms. You guys are free to add more arrows to this. Some people have asked me, why isn't there an arrow going from culture to outcomes? Because generally, when you talk about social norms, you're talking about non-contractual obligations, which don't affect formal outcomes. But institutions do affect formal outcomes. So that's kind of what I had to say. I mean, I have many more things to say, but I think I'll stop here because it's a fair bit to unpack, and I'll take a few questions if you guys thank you for being so patient. And I think you've asked me a few questions online.
Yeah, in the chat box, Upamanyu and yeah.
Okay, so why don't you
Pankaj.
ask me the questions? You can ask me by email other questions later. Okay, so we can take some questions now, and I'm around, and so you can come and meet me or whatever. So I'm just stop sharing the screen. Okay, so
Yeah, Upamanyu, are you here? Would you like to ask
Yes.
the question yourself?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like one was like in the dictatorship game, or there you mentioned that like when we do the experiment, people do not accept very small amounts. They tend to expect
it's
at least
ultimatum game.
ultimatum game. Yes. Yeah. So if there is if we scale up the amount and like the acceptor, the respondent is poorer compared to the one who is making the offer.
So those would
Does it-
change things. It'll change things. I have a full table of different contexts in which the ultimatum game, and it's heavily context sensitive. You're right. And these have been run actually in all kinds of societies. Sam Bowles, Herb Gintis, and people, and Joe Hendrick have gone and run it with tribes in Africa and pre-capitalist tribe, hunter-gatherer tribes. If you want all the lowdown on that, please read Bowles and Gintis's book, which is the Foundations of Human Society. If you can't find it, I'll send you the PDF. Okay. I shouldn't be saying all this. No, actually please go online and buy a copy of it. Okay. Like it's going to be put up on YouTube. You'll get a YouTube strike, Shivaji.
Yeah.
It's an Oxford book. But
I see.
get in touch with me. Go ahead.
Sure.
Anybody else?
Yes.
Other
Dipankar,
thing,
Dipankar, are you there?
Yeah, ask me. Anybody?
Yes, I'm there. I'm there.
Yeah. Can you please ask yourself?
Yeah. So my question is, there is a lot of understanding you have thrown into, what the usual economics got wrong and how behavioral economics is trying to see it differently, and numerous examples of what kind of behavioral irrationality, sometimes, if I may say, we are subjected to. Now, how to translate all of this knowledge into a theory of action, in the sense, how do I see behavioral economics or knowledge of it actually solving real life problems? I give you one example, and I'm from the finance industry, and oftentimes I come up with this dilemma. What appears to me that people do not value a correct advice, a correct financial advice that much. For example, among the high net worth individuals, I see a tendency that they value the control over the decision making of financial investments themselves. So, if I am sort of putting up an advice and it is a competition to his or her own idea, and suppose at the end of it, it is proved that my idea was led to better outcome, in the sense better investment return, but the fact that I can retain the control of my investment decisions outweighs the utility that I can give by a correct advice, even if after a lot of uncertainty it's proved that my advice was better. So this is kind of a irrational behavior, I would say, but my terming it as irrational doesn't help. Ultimately, in the market, what helps is the kind of delight you have managed to impart to the actual customer, and customer is not delighted by your financial by outcome alone.
Yeah, and I think it's a good question. I mean, what I think is your question. What you're, I think, trying to ask me is that is there any way to systematically kind of change human beings so that they can actually understand the value of good advice? And instead of getting waylaid by a whole lot of other stuff. So I feel human agents, particularly in investment decisions, are deeply influenced by peer groups. Okay, so what you may give as good advice may not be taken by them as good advice because it's heavily path dependent. Forget about investment of, as you said, people's what they delight from, I feel, is not just the physical characteristics of a good and an outcome. It is also some kind of ego consonance with certain groups they belong to. Are you getting what I mean?
Absolutely. What you are saying, I get the point, and I can give you an example, like investing in startups, for example. It comes up with a huge amount of risk or uncertainty because you just don't have the information. But in that social circle, investing in these startups may be a kind of a in thing to do. While it is possible that if I show a counter example that in the public listed market itself, you can make more money, and actually you have made money. There are comparisons, and I can give you direct examples also. Let's say a BSE, Bombay Stock Exchange, which is listed company, and NSE, which is yet to be listed, but its stocks are selling in the private market, in the sense.
I see.
Yeah. So people are flocking to the NSE, sale, thinking that when it is listed, when it would be eventually listed, it will make huge amount of gain, which is actually not the case. During the same period, BSE has outperformed NSE, private market stocks, but there is that appeal of getting something, ahead of everybody else, and the lure of making outsized gain, which is historically and factually not true.
So have you read Robert Schiller's work? I really urge you, as a practitioner, somebody who's has worked in this industry, and I think that's a remarkable book actually. That one of his books is a Nobel laureate, behavioral finance guy, and he's at Yale. And his work on animal spirits, that thing, and the other one, irrational exuberance. I think please read that book. It's echoing the things you're saying. Robert Schiller is one of the smartest, I feel, most radical economists around. And I mean, it's just because he's been in a mainstream place and he's kind of not on the internet constantly talking and all of that. But I think his work is outstanding actually in micro. I think it's the cornerstone of, if we have any behavioral finance theory, is Robert Schiller's work. I really urge you. And it's easy to understand, but it's not dumb stuff. It's advanced and lucid. I don't know. I mean, that's my recommendation. I think
Yeah, sure. And
I'll
I'll have a look. But what would motivate me to read more and is that whether there is a theory of action. In the sense, as a financial market participant, can I change this? I know that this is the state of the industry, but is there a tool that which will help me to sort of solve this problem? If I view it as a problem.
Yeah, but there are also individuals, I think, particularly with uncertain decisions which are timed, which are in the longer term. Human beings are horrible actually with long run decision making, which is uncertain. You understand? That's why we are awful at making decisions about climate change, environmental. Likewise, if you tell somebody, do this investment in 15 years, you'll get, what, 15 years? Like, who knows where I'll be, So I feel there is a lot of scope where financial professionals can actually educate the investors. And that, I think, is not done enough by financial corporations. Like, I once did a project with these HDFC guys, and I realized that, there a lot of people buying their products don't know like what these products are and what the terms are of these products. So they're very susceptible to all kinds of random information that they get from here and there. It's somewhere where there's enormous work to be done actually, to get a theory. I think Schiller actually talks about certain ways, I feel, which you can lower these kinds of biases, but an actionable theory which can be acted upon, we are quite far from that, I believe. But your question is nice, and I think this area is really nice.
Right.
So
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Kanika, please sorry.
First, Rajiv has written something. Rajiv wants to ask something.
Rajiv, bolo. Okay.
Rajiv, are you there?
Rajiv, please say it. I can't read. I'm feeling tired.
Rajiv, are you there?
No, I'm not saying anything. I'm saying that this is a classic case of this is some model on delegation where you have delegated some authority to take the financial decision, or else you can take on yourself. So, their cases, they basically, one case you have a loss of information if you don't delegate, and in one case, if you delegate, then there is a loss of authority. So the sir was saying something like that.
So that brings apart models of delegation, right? So you need some person who will you need to delegate to somebody who will make the optimal decision. But people may not want to pay the delegate. Now that's the other problem. People want to get that service for free, right? Because the person who you're delegating it to will value his advice at a certain, and it depends now whether the person is willing to pay the price for that. So it's a nice model. It's a two-stage model of some kind, I think. Go ahead, Kanika. Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, before
Thank
that,
you.
just 1 second,
Yes.
Kanika. Amit is asking whether there is any undergrad level textbook which is easy and lucid to
No,
for beginners at this
no.
stage.
I mean, there's no beginners. There's the huge behavioral foundations of behavioral economics by Sanjeev Dhami, which is huge, which is like 2,000 pages long. So yeah, there isn't actually a really nice. You can try the problem with these books in behavioral economics is they focus on one thing or the other. Like you won't find a book which will cover all the themes I've covered in this PowerPoint. That's the problem. I mean, if you want some more information, you can email me. I'm happy to share. I have 20 years of information or more.
Sorry, Kanika, please go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Thank you, sir. And I actually wanted to thank you for covering so many aspects of behavioral economics in one small session. Sir, I had something because you touched upon experiments also. I was just thinking that if you are, working on your research, how do you incentivize people to participate in your, in your experiments? Is there a way? I mean, if you can't pay them, how do you incentivize respondents?
See, financial payments are a big mainstay of economics experiments. But psychology experiments, particularly if you're studying certain psychological motivation, you can't kind of monetize it.
Yes.
Then I mean, I am not such a hard stickler for this, pay them or your data is worth nothing. In fact, all the classic papers of Kahneman and Tversky, he didn't pay subjects. It's all unpaid experiments. That being said, it's become hard to publish in economics with unpaid experiments. I did publish a paper with unpaid with Varsha at IIT. This was Journal of Behavioral Experimental Economics, which is economics journal, but it's a little more adventurous. They publish a little more psych-like things. But yeah, this is an issue. But personally, there's a big canon of experimentation where there is no explicit payment made.
Yes, so I've been reading quite a lot of literature where a lot of experiments on framing, on priming, on all of those things, present bias. There are so many experiments being conducted, but so I'm pursuing my PhD in this area, and that's why I was keen to understand.
Where are you doing your PhD? Sorry if I
from IGNU under Professor Vijeta.
Okay, so if you need any resources from me, get in touch. Okay.
Sure, sir. I'll do that. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Anybody else?
There is another question by Upamanyu. Upamanyu, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Go ahead.
So it is like this, when we vote in the voting market, is it okay to say like when the voters they satisfies and like they are boundedly rational instead of utility maximizing, like they do something logically, rationally, but like they have a default option or some sort of thing rather than going through the entire process, because ultimately their individual vote may not count for that much.
That's right. They may not be pivotal.
So like, are there models where individuals are expressed as satisficers than utility maximizers in this voting thing?
Yeah, or they are other regarding. So one application of other regarding preferences is to voting actually. Why would you vote? Like, what will your like? I am one vote. Okay. What is my incentive to vote? What's the probability I'll be pivotal? 0.0000000 what? So why do people vote at all? I think people vote because they feel like being a part of something, making societal change is a kind of, it's giving them a certain amount of utility. So there's what we behavioral economists call, it would be non-financial or non-pecuniary incentives would guide that behavior. Because if you had to actually have material incentives arising from that, I think, most people would not vote, right? Like, why would you go waste the money, go to the, stand in the heat and vote, right? You must care about some other things. You must feel, so I feel that this is tying in with what you're saying is that I think people have all kinds of, more than satisficing, I think people have other notions. And I mean, someone like Yuval Noah Harari who talks, who always says, oh, he will just. So it's a fiction that we human beings are very good at, that I am so important.
Like, why does certain, now we are seeing like polarized parties are continuing in power? Like, it has to be like some sort of thing, like because the previous one was bad. So like, is there a sort of default option we choose, like in
I
the
think, there is not one reason. I think, and this reason
Yeah.
differs by context. So in different places, in the different contexts, the reasons may be slightly different. So I feel that a lot of people have what is called like, action, their paralysis, in the sense that, yeah, I've voted, there is no other better choice, better to stick to my vote. So all uncertain long-term situations lead to this kind of paralysis. You know what I'm saying? We human beings are horrible at making voting, climate change. These are the big problems of today. So I don't think there is one motivation. I think there is more than one motivation why people stick on with incumbents. And then you'll see suddenly there will be a tipping. The incumbent will get a kick on the backside and out he goes. Have you noticed that also? Something will change and then things will be booted out. There was a book written by Malcolm Gladwell, and this is based on very interesting research actually on tipping. And there's also some work by that guy in UCLA, but not UCLA, it was Southern California. I forget his name. Anyway, but it's on this kind of idea of tipping. And might want to read those models, how public opinion goes up and then it stagnates and then suddenly it reverses one day, where a whole lot of people. So there's also effects of large group dynamics, I'm holding on to a certain candidate, I'm voting for him. Suddenly I find that my peer group has changed, and immediately and suddenly I switch. All of this is because the marginal impact is very small of the decision you make. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that's difficult but interesting at the same time, right? Because the marginal impact of your vote is very small, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's probably very interesting. There's all very interesting ideas. Anything else? And I mean, I'm free. Later on, you can always email me and we can have a discussion.
Yes. Is there any other question? Well, I have a couple of questions, but we can discuss later maybe. No, may not be right now because it's already late and you must be tired.
Wow,
It has been a lot.
thank you guys for
Thank
staying
you
this long.
for
I talk about this all the time,
but say we are extremely grateful for this session. In fact, on behalf of Delhi Economic Society, we must thank you formally. I mean, we would keep discussing these things at the department, but really it has been very interesting session, and a lot of live participants were there at one point of time. More than 50 people were there. And I'm sure the recording, many more will watch that recording and they will get back to you. Maybe I'll post your email ID somewhere in the link or description box, so that if somebody wants to get in touch with you in future, they may email.
or tell them to just go to my web. Don't put actually you.
Or maybe
I mean,
some other.
I guess what's the worst? Some other spammers will pick it up now because there are bots crawling around picking up numbers.
No, maybe within this group, not outside, not
yeah.
in general.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot, Sujoy.
You're welcome, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah,
it was really enlightening.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
And very good session.
Thank you so much, sir.
Have a great evening and email me if you need to understand anything more about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks, Sujoy. Thanks all for participating.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.